This is the story of Annie, a 25-year-old British journalist who had built her career exposing fake paranormal claims. For years, she had traveled across the world investigating haunted locations, abandoned buildings, and supernatural legends. More often than not, she discovered logical explanations behind the frightening stories. That was exactly why she wasn't afraid when she arrived in London to investigate one of the city's most infamous haunted locations, the Langham Hotel, a luxurious Victorian hotel known for its elegance, history, and its terrifying Room 333. According to local legends, many years ago, a doctor and his wife checked into Room 333 during their honeymoon. What should have been a romantic getaway ended in unimaginable horror. The doctor allegedly murdered his wife inside the room before taking his own life. Ever since that night, guests have reported seeing a pale figure wandering the halls. Some claimed they heard whispers in empty rooms. Others swore they saw a man standing beside their beds in the middle of the night. Most people refused to stay in Room 333. But Annie wasn't interested in ghost stories. She wanted evidence. Her plan was simple: spend one night inside the room, record everything, expose the truth, then move on to her next investigation. What she didn't know was that Room 333 was about to become the most terrifying experience of her entire life. As Annie entered the Langham Hotel, she was greeted by luxury and elegance. Soft, carpeted floors stretched across the grand lobby. Massive paintings decorated the walls. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the space with warm, golden light. Holding a suitcase in one hand and a camera bag in the other, Annie approached the reception desk. The receptionist welcomed her with a polite smile. But the moment Annie handed over her booking confirmation and said the words, "Room 333," the woman's expression changed. For a brief second, her smile vanished. Her hands froze. A strange silence hung between them. "Is everything okay?" Annie asked. The receptionist quickly forced a smile. "Of course, ma'am. Just a moment." A few minutes later, she handed Annie a room key. Not a key card, an actual metal key. That immediately felt strange. Most modern hotels used electronic cards. Why would this room still require an old-fashioned key? The receptionist never explained, and Annie didn't ask. She simply took the key and headed toward the elevator. The hotel was filled with guests and activity. People were chatting in the lobby. Staff members moved from one corner to another, and soft music echoed throughout the building. But everything changed when Annie reached the third floor. The atmosphere felt completely different. The corridor was silent. There wasn't a single person in sight. Room 333 was located at the far end of the hallway. As Annie walked toward it, she noticed the old paintings hanging on the walls. Their colors had faded with age, making the faces in the portraits appear strangely lifeless. Dim wall lamps cast a weak yellow glow across the corridor. The shadows seemed darker than they should have been. The carpet looked old and worn, as if it had not been replaced in decades. With every step Annie took, the wooden floor beneath it produced faint sounds. Finally, she arrived in front of Room 333. The door was made of dark, polished wood and fitted with a heavy brass handle. As Annie reached out and touched the handle, she immediately noticed something strange. It was unusually cold, much colder than it should have been. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she inserted the key and unlocked the door. The room was completely dark. Annie placed her suitcase on the floor and turned on the flashlight on her phone. Using its beam of light, she began searching for the switches. As she moved through the darkness, the room slowly revealed itself. The decor was entirely Victorian in style. There was a large king-size bed positioned in the center of the room. An antique dressing table stood against one wall. Directly opposite the bed was a full-length mirror. The mirror was large enough to reflect almost the entire room. After a few moments, Annie finally found the switchboard near the bed. She pressed the switch. The lights flickered on. At that exact moment, a loud "cround" came from behind her. Annie froze. Slowly, she turned around. For a brief second, her heart raced. Then she realized what had happened. The suitcase she had left outside the room had rolled over and fallen onto its side. Annie brought it inside and placed it next to the bed. She removed her coat and began unpacking her equipment. Everything was done methodically. First the tripod, then the camera, then the microphone. Within minutes, her recording setup was ready. Outside, evening was slowly turning into night. The last traces of daylight disappeared beyond the windows. Annie ordered a sandwich and settled onto a sofa in one corner of the room. It was November, and the air felt unusually cold. To make herself comfortable, she lit a small fire inside the room's fireplace. The warm flames as she opened her laptop and began researching previous ghost sightings connected to room 333. Her plan was simple. She would record the room throughout the night and review the footage later. Everything was prepared. The camera was recording. The microphone was active, and Annie became completely absorbed in her research. Without realizing it, she slowly drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, a sudden knock on the door woke Annie from her sleep. At first, she was disoriented. The room was dimly lit by the fading glow of the fireplace, and for a moment she couldn't understand what had awakened her. Then the knock came again. This time it was accompanied by a man's voice. "Room service, ma'am?" Annie frowned. That didn't make any sense. She had only ordered a sandwich earlier in the evening, and it had already been delivered hours ago. Confused, she stood up from the sofa. Perhaps someone had accidentally come to the wrong room. She walked toward the door and looked through the peephole. Standing outside was a butler. He was holding a silver tray in his hands. On top of the tray sat a large plate covered by a metal lid. Everything about him appeared normal, at least at first glance. Annie unlocked the door and opened it slightly. She told the butler that she hadn't ordered anything. The man simply smiled. Then he calmly replied that the order was indeed for her. Before Annie could say another word, the butler lifted the lid from the plate. The moment she saw what was underneath, her blood ran cold. Resting on the plate was a severed human head. Her head. It was Annie's own face staring back at her. The eyes were open. The expression was frozen in terror. A scream escaped Annie's throat. She instinctively shut her eyes. For a brief second, she couldn't breathe. Then she forced herself to look again. The corridor was empty. The butler was gone. Completely gone. There was no tray, no plate, no footsteps, nothing. The long hallway stretched before her in absolute silence. Annie stood frozen in shock. She couldn't understand what had just happened. After several seconds, she quickly slammed the door shut and locked it. Her hands were trembling. Immediately, she rushed toward her recording equipment. If what she had seen was real, the camera should have captured everything. She stopped the recording and checked the footage. Her heart sank. The camera's memory card had somehow become corrupted. That was impossible. She had tested every piece of equipment before setting it up. Nothing had been wrong with it. Trying to find another explanation, she grabbed her voice recorder. But the result was even stranger. The recorder had captured only a few sounds. The door opening, the door closing, and Annie's scream. There was no knocking, no voice saying room service, and no sign that anyone had ever been standing outside the room. The butler simply didn't exist on the recording. By then, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. The fire was still burning inside the fireplace. Yet the room felt colder than ever. The temperature seemed to be dropping with every passing minute. A strange feeling of unease settled deep inside Annie's chest. For the first time that night, she began to wonder if room 333 truly deserved its terrifying reputation. Annie couldn't make sense of what had just happened. Nothing she had experienced during her years of paranormal investigations had prepared her for this. The corrupted footage, the missing audio, the butler who appeared and vanished without a trace. None of it made any logical sense. Trying to calm herself down, Annie decided to go to the bathroom and splash some cold water on her face. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. Maybe she had fallen asleep and imagined everything. She stepped into the bathroom and turned on the light. For several moments, nothing seemed unusual. She leaned over the sink and washed her face. Then she slowly looked up and froze. In the mirror, standing directly behind her, was a man. A horrifying man. His skin appeared pale and rotten. Long, unnatural fingernails extended from his hands. His face looked partially decayed, as though it had been dead for years. He was dressed in old Victorian-era clothing that hung from his body in torn, ragged pieces. The figure stood completely still, watching her. Annie's heart nearly stopped. It looked exactly like the doctor described in the stories she had read earlier that evening. Slowly, the figure began raising its arms. Its hands stretched toward her neck, as if it intended to strangle her. A terrified gasp escaped Annie's lips. She spun around instantly, but there was nobody there. The bathroom was empty. The space behind her contained nothing except cold air. Annie's breathing became rapid. Fear was beginning to overwhelm her. For the first time since arriving at the hotel, she no longer felt safe inside room 333. She decided she had seen enough. Investigation or not, she wanted to leave. Immediately. She rushed back into the bedroom and began packing her equipment. The camera, the microphone, the tripod. Everything was shoved into her bags as quickly as possible. Once she was finished, Annie grabbed her suitcase and hurried toward the door. She reached for the handle, pulled it. Nothing happened. The door wouldn't open. She tried again. Harder this time. Still nothing. It felt as if something on the other side was holding it shut. A wave of panic swept through her body. She pulled repeatedly. The door refused to move. Then suddenly, the lights began flickering. The room flashed between darkness and light. Darkness, light, darkness, light. And during one of those brief flashes, Annie saw him again. The same horrifying figure, standing across the room. His body appeared unnaturally white. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow color. He wasn't standing still anymore. He was moving, slowly, deliberately, walking toward her. Every flicker brought him closer. Darkness, light, closer. Darkness, light, closer still. Annie's terror exploded into full panic. She began screaming for help, louder and louder. Her desperate cries echoed throughout the silent third floor. And somewhere beyond the walls of room 333, people finally heard her. Annie's screams echoed through the hallway. The sound was so loud and desperate that several hotel staff members rushed toward room 333. When they finally managed to enter the room, what they saw froze the blood in their veins. Annie was standing inside the bathroom. She was screaming uncontrollably, and she was repeatedly slamming her own head into the bathroom mirror, again and again and again. The mirror was almost completely shattered. Sharp pieces of broken glass were embedded in her face and forehead. Blood covered the sink and the floor beneath her. The staff members immediately rushed forward. But what terrified them most was the fact that Annie was completely alone. There was nobody else in the room. No pale figure, no ghostly doctor, no mysterious intruder. Only Annie. Yet she continued screaming as if someone was attacking her, as if invisible hands were forcing her forward. The staff members grabbed her and desperately pulled her away from the shattered mirror. Annie fought against them. She kicked, she struggled, she screamed hysterically. Her eyes were wide with terror. It was as though she was seeing something nobody else could see. Several staff members were forced to hold her down. Then, only moments later, Annie suddenly lost consciousness. Everything went black. Hours later, Annie slowly opened her eyes. She found herself lying in the hotel's medical room. Her head was bandaged, her body felt weak, and every muscle ached. For several moments, she simply stared at the ceiling, trying to understand where she was. Then the memories returned. Room 333, the butler, the severed head, the figure in the mirror, the flickering lights, the ghostly doctor. As soon as she was able to speak, Annie told the staff everything. She described the horrifying man she had seen. She explained how he had appeared behind her in the mirror, how he had followed her through the room, and how, in the final moments before help arrived, he had grabbed her head and repeatedly smashed it into the glass. The staff listened silently. None of them interrupted her. When Annie finally finished speaking, one of the older hotel employees exchanged a nervous glance with another staff member. After a long silence, he revealed something chilling. According to stories passed down through the hotel over the years, the doctor who had died inside room 333 had murdered his wife in a very similar manner. He had repeatedly slammed her head into a mirror before taking his own life. Annie felt a cold shiver run through her body. She didn't know whether to believe the story, but one thing was certain: the injuries on her face were real. The fear she had experienced was real, and the memories of that night would remain with her forever. Eventually, Annie recovered from her physical wounds, but she never forgot what happened inside room 333. To this day, she refuses to talk about that night in detail, and whenever someone mentions the Langham Hotel, a look of fear appears in her eyes, because some experiences leave scars that never truly heal, and some doors should never be opened. If you enjoyed this terrifying story, don't forget to subscribe to Deadly Tuesday for more animated horror stories and paranormal encounters. And remember, if you ever find yourself staying in room 333, you may not be alone.